Hope you enjoyed lunch, and I hope you don't fall asleep in the middle of this from the hearty food. My name is Colm Hally. I'm a software architect with Genesis.
My name is Siddharth Raizada, and I'm a software developer.
We both work for Genesis here in Galway, based out of their AI group, and we want to talk to you a little bit about how we do SRE in Genesis, and a little bit about Chaos Monkey as well. So I don't know how familiar you all are with Genesis. Genesis is in the business of customer experience. They provide the software that powers many of the world's contact centers. You may have indirectly used our software when ringing customer support, for example, to resolve an issue. We have both on-premise and cloud-based products, but today we're mainly focusing on Genesis cloud products. To give you a kind of a proportion of scale, we have 11,000 customers worldwide. They are typically medium to large enterprise customers, spread out over 100 or more countries. We serve these customers from 6 AWS regions, and we're continuously evaluating when to add more regions. In the past year, we've handled 25 billion interactions, and interactions here are phone calls, emails, WhatsApp conversations, Twitter DMs. If there's a channel that we can communicate with you on, we will. And in terms of AI, we now are in the business of predictive engagement, coming from the acquisition of AltoCloud, a startup that we worked for based here in Galway. And predictive engagement is reaching out to customers at the right time, so using machine learning to actually identify that. So given our scale and the kind of enterprise customer base we serve, reliability are key concerns for us, and stability, so that's something that will come up. So SRE, what is it and who is it? You might notice that I haven't actually listed out what the letters are, and that's actually because in Genesis we call it service reliability engineering, not site reliability engineering like you might be familiar with from the Google book. And that's principally because we don't operate any physical hardware, and also due to the service ownership model that we employ. And in terms of SRE engineers, what they do, I think this tweet nicely summarizes some of the responsibilities of those people and the spectrum of roles that they inhabit. So they're architects, structural engineers, and fire safety officers. They occasionally do controlled demolitions, so those are chaos tests. If reliability engineers are fighting fires, things are going very wrong. So that's the idea of avoiding manual toil and using automation in SRE. And the aim is to build fireproof software, so to build in resiliency upfront. So SRE is a valued career path in Genesis. We value those contributors all across the org. We do have one central SRE team. It's a small team, but we also have embedded SREs in other teams. And the idea is that the central team supports the whole organization. So why do we practice this in Genesis? It's critical in Genesis because we value platform stability on the same level as delivering new features. Why? We have a massive customer base and a huge amount of annual growth. So in the past 3 years, we've grown about 600%. It's a crazy number. So maintaining that growth requires a focus on reliability and stability. Also, if you think about how customer support in particular is used, it's when things go wrong, right? So trivial cases of resolving a product issue, like a billing issue or a refund, or even more severe cases of like accidents or natural disasters where you may have a large influx of calls into a contact center, and the contact center must scale to meet that demand, because it's absolutely crucial in that case that that call is answered. That person on the other end is really relying on that call. So again, stability, scalability, reliability are key. And we're part of a cloud platform. On top of AWS, we have about 210 microservices built by many different teams across the organization. They are continuously delivering new features, improvements, and that, with each change, causes a risk of failure. So we kind of think in our environment, the only guarantee is change and failure, especially when you consider that, with a large footprint in AWS, we're always exposed to hardware failures at AWS level. So there is continuous failure in the system. excuse me. We have a production-first mindset as a result, and that does not mean that you deploy into production first instead of all other regions or environments. It means that we prioritize the production availability ahead of all other things, so ahead of feature delivery, for example. And so, excuse me, sorry, getting ahead of myself. So to stay ahead of that trend of change and failure, we think it's absolutely important to break your system yourself before customers are impacted, and actually learn from breaking that system, and that's where chaos comes in. And here are some kind of highlights of what we do in SRE in Genesis. So the SRE team itself and the whole culture was introduced in 2017, focusing on reliability and stability in a period of huge growth. We try to recreate every production incident, so using chaos and designing new chaos types every time we have a novel incident in production. We do a huge amount of load testing, and we'll touch on that later on. We have automated chaos every day, 500 in the on Friday, I think, last week, that's pulled from. And we have a huge amount of change, as I said, so about 700 deployments weekly in production, 2,000 in the lower environments. So, and we have a huge amount of test coverage. So it's kind of the scale at which we're operating in terms of SRE and in terms of the customer base as well that we serve. So service ownership is vital importance. We have a very kind of severe, stringent model of it. So we expect teams to own their services from end to end. So we expect them to build their service and their infrastructure as code, to run their services in all of their test environments and in the production regions as well. We expect them to support it when things go wrong, and to secure their services to the highest level of SOC 2, HIPAA, and PCI, because again, our enterprise customers expect those kind of compliance regimes. And so that's a lot for each team to do. It's a lot of different responsibilities. And for that reason, we have central SRE team, central DevOps team, central security team that are small, but they leverage automation, tooling, and education to actually to force multiply their effect, and to be able to reach out to a whole organization of something like 400, 500 engineers. So that's just a little bit about how we operate. Sid's going to talk a bit more about some of the actual practices in terms of SRE in Genesis.
So one of the practices that we picked up was the SRE review, and it's ran by the SRE team. So this is only ran when a new piece of software is introduced to the whole stack, or when you are having production incidents repeatedly. Before anything can go forward, this piece of software or that service needs to be approved by the SRE team, or it does not get deployed to production. So basically, SRE holds the magic key to the production door. Another thing we perform for a new service is a fire drill, where they create chaos and check any failure points, any dependencies that are failure points for that service. But another thing that we have is game day, which is actually across the whole organization, where, for example, an AZ availability zone will fail, and everyone in the engineering organization will have to respond. Do you want to go next? So here are some of the checks that are done during an SRE review. For example, we check for documentation regarding escalation policies, running playbooks. We ask questions like, have rollbacks been tested? Do you know what your SLA is? And do you know your failure modes of your dependencies? So all of these things are important before your service starts interacting with customers. So once a service gets deployed to production, customer starts interacting with your service. On time, trends start to arise, incidents might start to occur, or support cases might arise too. We monitor for these trends, and when we think we are good to go, we have another SAE review where chaos type generates the same incidents on the service. If technical changes are needed, we feed those into our product backlog, and from there we can give it a specific priority. If gaps in knowledge are found, we make improvements to our education and training. Also, in both cases, we make improvements to our tooling. Monitoring and alerting is another key part of SRE. If you do not have monitoring and alerting in place, you wouldn't know if anything is going wrong with your service. So we have New Relic for metric reporting, Sumo Logic for system logs from an EC2 instance, and those two feed into PagerDuty that alerts if thresholds have been exceeded. We know about these thresholds using chaos testing and load testing, which we'll talk about later in the slides. All alerts are defined as code in repo, so infrastructure as code, basically. Service owners can define what is critical for themselves to wake them up, what alerts are critical to wake them up. This is a great enabler for service teams, because as Colin mentioned before, a service team owns from building it to supporting it. So during work hours, we treat non-prod as our production environment, same as our production environment. By this, what I mean is that if an incident does occur in lower environments, it is treated with the same priority level as an production incident. We do this because it's a great way to learn for new and inexperienced members, and to kind of get them onto the on-call rota for production environments.
So as Sid mentioned, the automation there to create those alerts based on infrastructure in our repos is very important. We also use automation throughout the whole service lifecycle, from build to deploy to maintenance and support. For build and deploy, it's something maybe a lot of people here are familiar with in terms of it's an immutable CI/CD, so continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline, where as the build artifact goes further through the CI pipeline, the more confidence we gain in its quality, and the more confidence we gain that it will be deployed safely. When we actually do go to deploy, we have automated tools for performing the deployment and for performing rollbacks as well. So gathering metrics to determine if a deployment has succeeded, and doing a blue-green type deployment, for example, or rolling back. So these things they give us confidence that there is safeguards in place, that when developers take the reins of production and they deploy their services there, that there is no risk, or very little risk, that things will go wrong, and that they can safely run those. Build and deploy are typically responsibilities of our DevOps team, but the SRE team has involvement across all 4 stages here to ensure that all the processes are robust. So even our build and deployment tools are actually SRE, or they're put through the SRE review process, fire drilled, chaos tested as well. Because those things actually happen in production, so you want to be able to verify them. In the SRE review specifically, we mainly focus on the maintenance and support cycles, which would be things that developers typically need upskilling in, so we try to grill them during the SRE review and make sure that they're familiar with the tools for those processes. In general, we promote self-healing mechanisms where possible. We do not want manual intervention, so where necessary, we do provide automated tools. And in particular, which might be of interest to people here, we have an automated tool for chaos, and it's a really special, extremely valuable tool called Erebus. I'm not really up on my Greek mythology, but Erebus, I think, means, or is a entity, a primordial deity.
That is born from chaos.
Born from chaos, yeah. It's a nice reference, but yeah. So it's an automated chaos engine. It provides regular random chaos and the ability to run self-service chaos through a UI and an API. It's a lot of fun. It basically allows us to take any service that we have in our whole platform and inject these types of issues. So network-related issues, dropped packets, latency, whatever it is, CPU spikes on an instance. Kind of your standard bag of things that can go wrong, to more nasty things like DNS issues or imposter boxes. The imposter one's pretty cool. Basically, we say if you use Redis Elasticache or something like that, we'll then put a box in the middle that pretends to be that service, redirect traffic there, and just return random data to your service. It's a really tricky one to recover from, but we test that out. So by default, it runs a random type of chaos on a random proportion of services every hour. It initiates the chaos event and then notifies the team. Typically, the team doesn't notice that anything has actually gone wrong because it's probably something they've tested before and they've have mechanisms in place to handle. But if something does go badly wrong, the alerting monitoring will kick into place, and the team will be aware of it and will hopefully fix it. The idea then is that since they can go into Erebus, trigger their own chaos again, the exact one that they just were notified of, they can actually reproduce that incident, get down to the bottom of it, and put in a measure in place to validate that and fix it. So that's automated case, but if someone's adding a new dependency as well, it's very useful. Add Redis, for example, again. We all like to hate on Redis. Add Redis, and then actually go and fail it and see how your service responds before you go into production with that new dependency.
Yeah.
So it's quite valuable. It is an internal tool for now. We are looking to open source it next year, hopefully in the first quarter. And I'll try and send it out to this mailing list if we can. When that's done. That's it.
So that was Erebus. Another common practice that we do in Genesis is writing postmortems, or as we call it, root cause analysis, or RCAs. So I'll just talk about what we specifically do differently in Genesis. We perform RCAs for both production incidents and near misses that are so any production incidents that are customer impacting. It's a full blameless process, so no finger pointing or if you did that or you did this, nothing like that. And results of the RCA are shared against the whole around the whole organization and reviewed every week. There's another thing we do locally is that we train on how to write an RCA, how to debug an incident, and how to present an RCA. So usually we maybe we'll pick an incident from the lower environments and try to debug that. Maybe that incident occurred in the last week, or we use Erebus, as Colm mentioned, and we create an incident on a particular service and try to debug that incident and write up an RCA on that. So, load testing. Genesis have massively invested in load testing. We have a test environment that is bigger than our production environment. We run continuous load on test environment. This our continuous load runs from 9 to 5 weekdays, and every 2 days every week we switch it up to two times the production load. We do this so that we ensure deployments to productions go smoothly, specifically so when when a service gets deployed to production, it's not the first time it's under load. We also use load testing to identify any bottlenecks or areas that we can reduce costs in.
So that's me again. So yeah, that was kind of a whirlwind kind of tour of the SRE practices that we have in Genesis. You know, depending on your team or your organization, how you actually apply SRE to your products will probably differ a great deal to how we do it. I hope it gives you some food for thought, though. If I could give one recommendation, I think it's to embrace chaos as a learning tool. I think Simian Army is a good open source alternative to Erebus. Your applications, if you use chaos testing, will become more resilient, and your developers, I think, which is a key one, will become more capable as a result. Yeah, and lastly, applying SRE culture to your org, it takes a lot of time, money, especially in the case of load testing, and buy-in from your executive management to your middle management to your development teams. Everybody needs to buy into the long-term value that SRE gives you. For example, you know, doing something like a game day where you take a whole engineering organization and put them on standby while you run a massive availability zone failure example. You know, that takes a lot of considerable amount of time from your engineering department. So getting management to sign off on that could be a hard sell. But if they understand the benefits that SRE brings, then they will buy into it, and that's kind of where we're in a lucky position to be in, right? So I think we've got probably a good bit of time to actually take some questions if you have them. Before we close, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we're actually hiring. David there is manning the booth outside, and be happy to answer any questions you have on what we do and what positions are available. I'd like to thank the organization here for having us, and to you all for listening. Thanks.
Okay, anyone have any questions for Sid or Colm? I see one down here.
How's it going, guys? Just a very quick one. So you've switched over to this SRE kind of mindset and way of working. How can you tell that it's improved your situation, or what kind of metrics, or could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Simply that when large-scale incidents happen, so one is anecdotally from last week in Frankfurt, there was an AZ level outage, and when I jumped on the incident call at 8 in the morning, the kind of atmosphere in the room was very leisurely, no one was too worried. We were just monitoring for recovery at the time. Whereas I remember, I think it was about a year ago, something very similar happened, and it was chaotic, right? So that is just anecdotally how I think in the SRE team there is a lot more harder metrics around the actual uptime, and we have different grades of services, tier 0, tier 1, tier 2, and our tier 0 services have not had an outage in the past 2 years, which is, so that's things like Kafka and our public API gateway and things like that. So those are some examples of how we do it. And I think you can also track the number of support cases as well that come in. So when we internally know something is going wrong, and there's no influx of support cases, I think that's a pretty good sign. Yeah.
Anyone else?
What's sort of the makeup of the SRE team? Are you numbers, and then what type of engineering? Is it are these software engineers? What kind of backgrounds?
So principally software engineers. I think testers make very good people for SRE because they know how to break things, and especially when we talk about chaos, that's one key aspect. To be able to look at a high-level architecture and identify some weak points and target those is a very good skill set to have. Our SRE team, I think, right now is only 3 people. They do accept rotations, so some developers go for a set number of months, maybe 3 to 4 months, rotate in, learn the skills there in that team, and then come back out to their own service team. And yeah, so just to say that myself and Sid aren't actually in the SRE team. We're just kind of evangelizing the practices that they have. Yeah, any other?
I think self-healing is a big thing in SRE, that maybe, for example, if we didn't have these monitoring, alerting, or any this chaos that we do before service goes into production, I think we know what can go wrong, and we have mitigation strategies for those, to have them auto-resolve themselves, or maybe have a dev who knows, or there's a playbook for that, and they can just maybe guide themselves to how to resolve this situation.
So, anyone who's kind of been through the weeds before like as a system admin would be a good fit as well. Again, knowing the stack kind of top to bottom is a good characteristic there. So, hope that addressed the question fully. Yeah.
I say that's all I have time for now at the moment. So big thanks again to Sid and Colm for their great talk.